to our webinar. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the regulatory framework governing the cosmetics industry in India. Before we jump into the details of the regulatory framework, let's take a quick look at the cosmetics industry in India. In 2022, India was ranked 4th globally in revenue for the cosmetics industry. While multinational giants still continue to rule the roost when it comes to product breadth and categories, local players have made a marked dent in this space. The likes of Nykaa, Mamaearth, Khadi Essentials, and many more have brought in a substantial array of products that cater to unique domestic needs and has helped in shaping a much more competitive landscape. While the industry went through a slowdown during the COVID years, it briefly picked up post-COVID in 2021. However, due to inflation, unstable economies, and geopolitical tensions, there have been challenges that the cosmetics industry has been facing in the recent past. Predictions and trends, though, seem to suggest a marked shift to affordable, multi-purpose beauty products due to these factors. In fact, some studies also indicate that high stress level amongst consumers may drive demand for emotional and self-care products. But I hope that the cosmetics industry is not betting on that for increased growth and demand. We're all well aware that India is a major cosmetics market due to its growing middle-class population. And projections are that the industry will grow at close to 7% CAGR in the next 5 years. And this is largely driven by increased consumer spending power, disposable income, and skincare and health awareness. What are we noticing as trends or upcoming trends in this industry? One, for sure, is an emphasis on sustainability. Consumers are looking for eco-friendly cosmetics as they become more conscious of the effects their purchase have on the environment, especially millennials and Gen Z. Multinational corporations have been consciously coming out with numerous new and sustainable initiatives, and some of these include eco-friendly alternatives to plastic, a more sustainable supply chain, eco-friendly packaging, and they're also experimenting with refill innovations, etc. The other trend that we notice is the rise of clean beauty or natural ingredients. Clean beauty is gaining attention with a focus on safe and non-toxic ingredients. Thanks to social media and influencers shaping opinions, customers seek transparency and effective, safe ingredients from brands. Increasing awareness amongst customers is also promoting scrutiny on beauty product and ingredients used in such products. The third trend that we notice is a growing demand for specialty active ingredients. Consumers, in addition to natural ingredients, are seeking effective science-backed products. In fact, they're exploring even lesser-known brands for these factors. The industry, as we've seen it over the course of the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen various M&A and investment activity in homegrown Indian brands. The most public of these is, of course, Nykaa's IPO, and there have been also other investments in fairly large investments in companies like MyGlam, Wow Skin Science, Purple. So there is obviously an interest in the investor community as well when it comes to this sector. And these are all indicators that the market has a lot of potential. Before we move into, that's just a quick introduction to the industry. Before we move into the specifics of the webinar on the regulatory framework that we are covering, a quick introduction to the firm and the speakers on this webinar. Spice Route Legal is a full-service law firm. We have across 5 offices in India. We have close to around 85 odd lawyers. with a support team of close to 30 odd non-lawyers. Our focus, we do have sector-focused approach in contrast to a lot of other legal organizations in India. One of the sectors that we focus on is healthcare and life sciences, and cosmetics come into that play. We work across the spectrum when it comes to the healthcare and life sciences sector, right from helping companies, international corporations incorporate their setup in India, to setting up their manufacturing units, helping them with their regulatory requirements, assisting them through the life cycle of their journey, along with commercial documents, and of course, transactional work such as investments and M&A deals. My name is Praveen Raju. I'm a partner with the healthcare and life sciences practice. I also lead the corporate M&A practice. Along with me, I have my colleagues, Renuka, who's a senior associate in the healthcare life sciences practice, as well as the corporate M&A practice. And we have Bhakti, who's an associate in the same sector. All of us work with various clients in this sector across the life cycle, like I mentioned earlier. And there are really interesting and innovative questions that we are seeing from our clients in the recent past. I think Renuka will touch upon, or Renuka Bhakti will touch upon some of the queries that we've seen, which are out of the ordinary. Before I hand over the reins to Renuka and Bhakti, who are the experts on this, and before they start the webinar on the regulatory framework, just a few pointers. We have a Q&A box over here. Please put in your questions, etc., that you have while we go through the webinar. We will, in most probability, address them at the end of the webinar. But if there are many questions that come along, we will stop along the way and we can address those. Renuka, over to you.
Thank you, Praveen. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Like Praveen mentioned, my name is Renuka, and I'm part of the healthcare and life sciences team at Spiceroot Legal. Today, we will be covering the cosmetic regulations in India. And today's session will be split into 3 parts, largely. We will start with what is a cosmetic and how is it different from a drug. We'll move on to key rules and regulations that govern cosmetics in India, along with a brief look at the foreign direct investment regulations. And lastly, we will cover consumer safety for selling cosmetics in India. So like Praveen mentioned before, the main reason why we thought of doing this webinar is because beauty as a concept is now trending, and India's beauty sector have been growing rapidly. So actually one of our international clients actually had this question whether brow tinting, which is a semi-permanent way of dyeing your eyebrows, whether that was legal or not. Now, because of this, we realized there are so many types of innovative products now being sold in the market that it becomes important for both customers as well as companies to understand the cosmetics regulations. So to begin with, we will see what is a cosmetic. In simple terms, cosmetics is any product that you use for enhancing your appearance, which is primarily for aesthetic purposes. And cosmetics can come in various forms. It can come in liquid, creams, gels, sprays. So for example, a hairspray, a concealer, or even a toothpaste is a cosmetic product. So some of the reasons why cosmetics have gained so much importance is because the percentage of income now that people spend towards purchasing cosmetics have increased, and they are easily available and affordable. So let's take an example of a lipstick. A lipstick can range anywhere from, let's say, 50 rupees to even 50 lakh rupees, depending on the brand. Like Praveen mentioned, there's also more influence of social media. There are more celebrities endorsing makeup products. And there's even the concept of beauty trends when it comes to social media. There's also a broader range of cosmetics now available, which depends on your skin tones and your body types. There's also organic and vegan cosmetics now easily available. There's also a lot more activity in the cosmetics industry, with Nykaa acquiring some stake in Earth Rhythm recently. Earth Rhythm is a homegrown cosmetics company which promotes smart and safe skincare. So the primary regulation in India governing cosmetics is the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940, along with the 2020 cosmetics rules, which are formulated under the Act. There was also a 2023 amendment which was proposed to the cosmetics rules, And we will look at this in our subsequent slides. So the legal position of a cosmetic and how it's defined under the regulation then becomes important. So as per the Act, as per the Drugs Act and the Cosmetic Rules, a cosmetic is any product or any article that you either rub or pour or you sprinkle or you spray on or in any other manner introduce into your human body. And the primary purpose of this is for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering your appearance. Therefore, the definition of a cosmetic is so broad that it includes all the new types of innovative cosmetics now available in the market. So the next important question in this chain of discussion is whether a cosmetic product is different from a drug under the Drugs Act. Simply put, they are different. A drug is essentially any product that you use, that you consume for treating or mitigating any disease or disorder. While cosmetics, on the other hand, are more for increasing or beautifying your appearance. Even the compliance requirements are different. Drugs are highly regulated and there are more stringent compliances under the Drugs Act, while cosmetics, on the other hand, is not as stringent as drugs. So in some cases, the question arises if the product is a drug or a cosmetic, and sometimes the line between this becomes blurred. Let's take the example of a shampoo. There are various types of shampoos available in the market. There are medicinal shampoos, which are used or which are prescribed by a doctor for any acute dandruff or eczema that you have. There are also regular shampoos available, which are not for any particular disease you have, but you use for regular wash for a healthy scalp. So in this case, how does the manufacturer decide if a product is a drug or a cosmetic? And sometimes what happens is companies may unknowingly violate the provisions of the Drugs Act by wrongly marketing a product as a cosmetic, while actually it's a drug. So courts in India have come up with a test to differentiate a product between a drug or a cosmetic. So we look at two case laws now. In the first case of Himami Limited versus Commissioner of Commercial Taxes, the Allahabad High Court laid down the primary purpose test. So what they said that is in this case is that the primary role and the purpose of the product will itself determine how the product will be classified under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So in this case, they used the example of a soap. So they said that the soap itself may have many facets of enhancing your beauty and maintaining hygiene, but it may also be recommended by a doctor for a specific medical purpose. So for example, if you have acne, then in this case, if it's doctor prescribed particular disease, then it is a drug, while otherwise it is a cosmetic. In another case, the courts analyzed Ayurvedic oils, and the manufacturer in this case argued that while the oil did not contain any fragrance, which is typical for a cosmetic, it was still an ordinary cosmetic hair oil. However, the courts did not agree with this point of view, and they said that you have to look at it from the point of view of the manufacturer. And in this case, because the hair oil contained certain medicinal ingredients, it was actually a drug and not a cosmetic. Therefore, there is no set or there is no objective test that you can provide. It will all depend on a case-to-case basis. But from the case laws that we've seen, we can determine there are two key factors, but there may be others as well. The two key factors, the first being the end result and what is the main purpose of the product. And secondly, the ingredients can also determine if it's a drug or a cosmetic. Over to Bhakti now to look at the regulations governing cosmetics in India.
Thank you, Renuka. In the next segment of this presentation, we'll be dealing with the relevant laws and regulations in the country for cosmetics. The first being the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940 and the Cosmetic Rules of 2020, the Bureau of Indian Standards and the Legal Metrology Act of 2009. Now, to briefly touch upon the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, this was brought in 1940 with the aim to make regulations around the import, manufacturing, sale, and distribution of drugs and cosmetics in India. The Central Drug Standard Control Organization, which is set up under the Directorate General of Health Services, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, is the national regulatory authority of India and the main authority basically to regulate all activities relating to drugs and cosmetics in the country. Now, the cosmetic rules also provide for the establishment of a central licensing authority as well as a state licensing authority. The Drugs Controller General of India is the central licensing authority and mainly deals with any certification or registrations for cosmetics, import of cosmetics in India, whereas the state licensing authority is in each respective state deals with the manufacture and sale of cosmetics in that respective state. For a very long time, the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940 and the Drugs and Cosmetic Rules of 1945 were the only primary rules available in the country which were regulating the cosmetic sector. But as we've seen with the increase in consumption in the market and the boom in the sector itself, there was a need that was felt for newer updated laws and regulations to be in place. And hence, in 2020, the cosmetic rules of 2020 were brought in. Now, this was in continuation to the powers that was given to the regulators under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. But it was basically the cosmetic rules of 2020 were basically, the intent was to basically codify all regulations for the cosmetic sector separately. Now, in the next slide, this segment, we'll be discussing what were the most important amendments or most important regulations that were brought in through the cosmetic rules of 2020. Firstly, there was a concept of authorized agent which was introduced, which basically meant there was one person authorized by the manufacturer in India who would be responsible for the manufacturer's business activities as well as in compliance related to all applicable laws. Now, if you've seen in India, in other regulations such as the Companies Act, there is an officer in charge who's there, which is basically appointed and ensure that that person is there so as to ensure that all liability as well as compliance is followed through by one person. This is also very similar to the concept of a responsible person under the cosmetic regulations in the UK, which basically appoint a responsible person so that in case of any liabilities, the onus falls upon one person. The next concept that was brought in, and that was a very innovative and new move that was brought in under the cosmetic rules, was the concept of a new cosmetic. Now, a new cosmetic is defined as a cosmetic which contains a novel ingredient that has not been used anywhere else in the world or is not recognized for use in cosmetics in any national or international literature. This was brought in again with the idea that there were new ingredients being introduced in the market in the cosmetic products, and to ensure safety of these products before consumption, there was a dual approval procedure which was introduced under the cosmetic rules of 2020. We'll be discussing the process for licensing and registration in the next segment for new cosmetics as well. Now, the third concept that was brought in was a single license application. The process of registration and import of cosmetics largely remains unchanged from what it was there under the Drugs Act of 1940. But the forms and the applications procedure-wise has changed significantly. One of the new concepts that was brought in for importers to have ease of business in India was a single license application wherein an importer can seek a single registration certificate to import one or more cosmetic produced by the same manufacturer into a single production facility, which involves multiple factories working jointly. This was to ensure that there was ease of business and there were more products available in the market for consumption and for choices to the consumers as well. However, there are some cosmetics which are banned and are prohibited to be imported in the country. Some of which are if the cosmetic in question is banned for manufacturing, selling, distribution in the country of origin, it is banned in India. Secondly, if the use before or use by date of a product or a cosmetic being imported in India is less than 6 months away, then such a cosmetic cannot be imported into India. Thirdly, if any cosmetic uses hexachlorophene, which is known to have harmful effects on humans, is being used in a cosmetic, again, such a cosmetic is not permitted to be imported in India. And lastly, any cosmetic which has been tested on animals after November 2014 is also not allowed to be imported in India. This is to ensure, as Praveen mentioned, cruelty-free products in India for import as well as manufacturing. Now, while the cosmetic rules of 2020 did bring in a lot of new factors and did try to bridge the gap between the 1945 rules and the present day cosmetics market, there was again a need felt in the last 3 years to clarify some of the provisions that were brought in through the 2020 rules, and hence the draft cosmetic amendment rules of 2021 were brought in. They were introduced in May 2023, and the draft was open for public comments till 1st July 2023. Now, some of the very interesting clarifications that the amendment brought in was firstly on the Central Cosmetics Laboratory. Under the cosmetic rules of 2020, there was a central cosmetic laboratory which was established to test cosmetics which were being introduced in the market. All the new cosmetics were also going through testing, but there were no specification of what would constitute as a central cosmetic laboratory. So in the amendment rules, the provisions clarify that any laboratory which is established under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which is a drug laboratory, central drugs laboratory, can also be a central cosmetic laboratory, and the government has the power to label any drugs laboratory as a cosmetic laboratory. Secondly, it was on the maintenance of records. The cosmetic rules of 2020 mention that all records need to be maintained for a period of 3 years after expiry of the product. However, the amendment rules state that the records must be maintained for a period of 3 years or 6 months from the date of expiry, whichever is later, so as to ensure that record keeping is done in a systematic way and for a longer period of time. Thirdly, and a very interesting amendment which was proposed was the clarification on definitions of use before and date of expiry. Now, if you see any label, they will always have a use before and a date of expiry, which is mentioned on the label of a cosmetic product. A use before date basically means if the date is mentioned, means you can use the product before the first day of that month on which is mentioned on the label. Whereas if it's the date of expiry, then you can use that product till the last day of the month specified in the date of expiry. The fourth and the last important provision which was brought in through the amendment rules was of labeling for exports. Now, the amendment rules provide clarity because there was a need that was felt that after the 2020 rules, there was a lot of compliance on products which were manufactured for exports. They had to do dual compliances, and firstly under the cosmetic rules of 2020, and then additionally on the of the country where they were exporting these products to. So the draft cosmetic amendment rules propose that the products which are manufactured with the sole purpose of exporting into another country can comply with the regulations and the laws of the country of export, and they necessarily do not need to follow the labeling requirements under the cosmetic rules of 2020. While this was on the cosmetics, the regulations that are there prevalent there, in the next segment, we'll be dealing with the labeling requirement for a cosmetic product. Now, the Bureau of Indian Standards and the Legal Metrology Act are the basic regulations, are the laws prevalent in India for labeling of any goods and products in the country. The Bureau of Indian Standards mentions a 9th schedule. Under that 9th schedule, there's a list of cosmetics which is mentioned, which needs to do additional compliance in case of any product that falls under that particular list. If you see the screen, there's a number of things that are mentioned on the label itself: the ingredients, the manufacture date, the expiry date, the warnings, the weight, the manufacturing license number. All of these are requirements under the Legal Metrology Act. So under the Legal Metrology Act, the following basic declarations such as the name and address of the manufacturer, the name and address of the importer, the common and generic names of the commodity which is being packed, all needs to be mentioned on the label itself, because as the consumer is becoming more aware, before picking up any product, we check the labels to see the ingredient list to see if that fits the purpose of which you're buying that product for. Now, in addition to the Legal Metrology Act and the BIS, the cosmetic rules also prescribe certain labeling requirements. The cosmetic rules mention that you need to have an inner and an outer label, which must mention the name of the cosmetics, the name and complete address of the manufacturer. So if if you bought any cosmetic, there's a small paper which is there inside the cosmetic itself. It usually provides you all information of if there's any side effects, if there are any warnings, if you should do a patch test, and instructions of use. These are all requirements under the cosmetic rules to be labeled for each product that is there and being circulated in the market. Now, after the labeling requirements, now we'll be discussing on the license requirements and the licenses required by each manufacturer or importer of cosmetics in the country. Firstly is the manufacturing license. So under the Rule 23 of the cosmetic rules, any manufacturer of cosmetics is required to apply for a grant of manufacturing license. It's under the form COS 5 and it is submitted to the state licensing authority. The process is fairly online and it's the standard process which was there in place earlier under the prevalent laws as well. What is important to note that if cosmetics are being manufactured at more than one premises, then a separate license, a separate manufacturing license is to be procured for each of those factories separately. So all your factories must also be compliant with the guidelines that are prescribed under the cosmetic rules itself. Once granted, a manufacturing license is valid for perpetuity. Only it is subject to a fees which is to be paid, a license retention fee which is to be paid mostly at the end of each 5-year period. However, a manufacturing license can be cancelled or suspended if there's any non-compliance with the license or the cosmetic rules itself. Now, moving on, as they've introduced the concept of new cosmetics, the licensing requirement for a new cosmetic are slightly different than what it is for a manufacturing license. There is a first step which is there for an approval of a new cosmetics. So first, an application is to be made to the Central Licensing Authority if there is any novel ingredient being used in the cosmetics being circulated in the market. Only once that approval is received, you take that approval and you attach it along with the form COS 5, similar to that you had applied for the manufacturing license to the state licensing authority. The process is fairly similar after that to the manufacturing license itself, but there's an additional step of an approval which is required, as I previously mentioned, because there are novel ingredients that are being introduced in the market. So to ensure safety standards, there's an approval from the Central Licensing Authority before getting the manufacturing license. Now, a third license and the most common one that we've come across is the loan license. It is usually procured by manufacturers who are either manufacturing at a small scale or a startup who's planning to manufacture cosmetics at someone else's facilities. So if you're doing a small scale production, you wouldn't want to set up your own factory at the first instance. What you would prefer is to use someone else's facility and to start manufacturing your products starting from there. So a loan license is granted for manufacturing a cosmetic to a manufacturer who intends to utilize the manufacturing site of another licensee. This is also, again, the form COS 6 is to be filed for a loan license. The process and the guidelines for the facilities in place are fairly similar to that of a manufacturing license. The process of application is also very similar to that of a manufacturing license itself. Now, the last bit that we're going to be touching upon in this segment is on the import registration certificate. So the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has mandated that all items that are being imported into the country should have a mandatory requirement to obtain a registration certificate. So under Rule 12 of the cosmetic rules also, the state, they have stated that there is an application that is to be made to the Central Licensing Authority for an import registration certificate. This can be made by the manufacturer himself. The application can be made by the manufacturer himself or through his duly authorized agent in the country, or the importer of such cosmetics in India, or if there is any other subsidiary of the Indian authorized agent that the manufacturer has, they can file for such an application. Only once your application is approved, or if you've furnished all documents, once those have gone through approval, are you allowed to import cosmetics in the country. This is usually a period of 6 months, which takes for either the acceptance or rejection of your registration certificate. However, it's very important to note that a seller or a retailer marketer will not need a separate license to sell cosmetics in India. But they do need to make sure that if they're buying products from a manufacturer, the manufacturer should have the applicable licenses. So it is prohibited under the cosmetic rules to sell any products which wherein the manufacturer does not have the necessary licenses. So in case if you buy any goods from a manufacturer who does not have a license, and you as a seller decide to sell that in the market, if there are any liabilities that come back on that product, they may also fall upon the seller or the marketer of that product as well. Now, this was on the regulatory aspects of cosmetics in India. In the next segment, we'll be discussing the foreign direct investments in the cosmetics sector. Over to you, Renuka.
Thank you, Bhakti. So, as we've already discussed, the growth and the sale of cosmetics in India have made India a very attractive destination for foreign investments. So, to give a brief, foreign investments are regulated by the Foreign Direct Investment Policy of 2020, or the FDI policy, along with the FEMA non-debt instrument rules of 2019. So there are two routes prescribed under the regulations. You have an automatic route where no approval of the government is required for any foreign investment, and an approval route where you require the approval of the government. There are also sectorial caps prescribed that will determine what is the percentage of the Indian entity that can be held by a foreign party. So the thumb rule for a cosmetics industry is that it is an automatic route and where 100% investment is permitted. In contrast, when it comes to pharmaceuticals under the FDI policy, in case of greenfield projects, 100% is permitted, while in case of brownfield projects, only 74% is permitted. Beyond that, you will require the approval of the government. However, there are other provisions of the FDI policy that will also apply to you depending on the type of seller or the type of sale that you do. So, for example, if you're a retailer, depending on the number of brands that you sell, there is a different condition prescribed. So if you're a single brand retail trade or an SBRT where only a single brand is sold, then 100% is permitted. But if you are doing more than one brand or multi-brand retail trade, then only 51% is permitted. There are also conditions if you are a wholesaler where 100% FDI is permitted. But if you're doing an e-commerce kind of sale, which is online, and if you're doing marketplace model, then 100% is permitted. And because of all of these restrictions, most foreign brands now operate in India through local franchisees and distributors, and they don't set up a separate entity by itself. In the next segment, we will look at cosmetics and consumer safety. Now, like we've discussed throughout the webinar, there are new types of cosmetics products now easily available in the market, and therefore consumer safety has become important. For example, hair dye. There are many cases of consumers complaining of skin irritations or even skin cancer when they've used hair dyes. So the government has come up with 3 regulations to govern this. Firstly, it is the Cosmetics Rules of 2020, then the Consumer Protection Act of 2019, and the Sales of Goods Act of 1930. Under the Drugs Act, it clearly mentions that a manufacturer, a distributor, or an importer cannot sell any cosmetic product which is either misbranded, adulterated, or spurious. Adulterated is if any, let's say, a color which is used in the cosmetic itself is not what is prescribed or is toxic in nature. Spurious, on the other hand, is if the name resembles another cosmetic or if the product resembles another cosmetic. And there was a case where recently the inspector under the Drugs Act conducted a raid on a beauty parlor in Pune, and they found that there were products being sold without labels. In this case, that was a spurious cosmetic product being sold. Thirdly, misbranded cosmetics are those where an inappropriate labeling or a false or misleading label is provided on the product. For example, if a lotion bottle mentions that it's 100 ml, but it's actually only an 80 ml bottle, then it is a misbranded cosmetic. And if any such cosmetic is sold, then under the Drugs Act, the inspector has the authority to conduct raids and seize any such product. There's also a voluntary recall mechanism prescribed under the cosmetics rules, where a manufacturer or an approved agent, if they feel that the product that they've sold is not of standard quality, then they can recall it from the market, and they will just need to inform the central or the state licensing authority of the reasons for such recall. Other than the Drugs Act, even the Consumer Protection Act and the Sales of Goods Act deals with product safety, where if any defective or any hazardous product is sold, then liability can be imposed on the manufacturer or the seller, and compensation can be provided to the aggrieved. So it becomes important for cosmetic companies to not make any unsubstantiated or any misleading claims on their products, because actions can be taken against them. So one case we will look at is in the case of Imami, where most of you must have heard of the company called Imami, where they were selling a fair and handsome cream. On their label itself, they mentioned that if you use it for 3 weeks, then you will become visibly fair. However, the petitioner in this case used it, but he did not become fair, and he filed a case in the District Consumer Forum in Delhi. The District Consumer Forum agreed with the petitioner's claim, and they awarded damages of 15 lakhs to him. And because of all of this, and thanks to obsession of being fair and beautiful and all of that, now marketers are using this as a gimmick to promote wrong claims. There was even one of the largest names in the market which used fairness in their name, had to completely rebrand because of the claims that they made on their labels. Or even a toothpaste for that matter. Most of you must have seen the ad where they claimed to be world's #1. They were asked to discontinue and penalty was imposed on them. Therefore, it becomes important for manufacturers and sellers to be very careful to not make any unsubstantiated claims when it comes to their cosmetics products. In the last segment, now Praveen will give our concluding thoughts on the webinar. Over to you, Praveen.
Thank you, Renuka Bhakti. I hope this was fairly insightful, and you enjoyed the presentation and our webinar around the regulatory framework. I think that this is basically a quick overview of what the regulatory framework contains. I think there's a fine balance when it comes to ensuring that the industry is growing while there's a regulatory framework which protects consumers. And I think we believe that at least the regulatory framework as it stands now does take that into account, with consumers becoming more discernible, and with consumers actually in today's world, in India, kind of looking at labels to find out what products and ingredients go into their cosmetics and what they're using, makes manufacturers more cautious and more responsible to their consumers. Like Renuka mentioned, I think that consumers do not hesitate in this country anymore to kind of take action. We may not be anywhere close to how litigious or class action suits which happen in the US, but we can see a marked movement and a change to how consumers do take action and do come forward when there are claims which are unsubstantiated. So manufacturers have become a lot more cautious in this country, and for the good is what we believe. We also believe that the cosmetics industry itself is poised for tremendous growth, thanks to the disposable income and the growing middle class population of India. I think this will be an industry which will continue to grow. We will also see newer technologies and newer forms of beauty care products or beauty care treatments which are going to come into play. And the cosmetics industry is, going through a phase where, while it's largely kind of, you see the old forms continue to stay, I think there will be new and more innovative products which will come into the market. Thank you for attending the webinar. Let us know if you have any questions. If there's anything in particular, we'll kind of just hold for a minute before you kind of, if you want to kind of post some questions, and we can respond to those. Okay, I'll presume that we don't have any questions. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.